Welcome to Never Again is Now, a podcast about anti-Semitism. Today, we'll look at some forces behind the growing anti-Israel sentiment and anti-Zionism in American universities. I'm Evelyn Marcus, and in addition to being a psychologist, I'm featured in the documentary about anti-Semitism, Never Again is Now. I am a Dutch Jew and a daughter of Holocaust survivors. In 2006, I immigrated to the United States because of the rising anti-Semitism in Europe.
I am Phyllis Zembler-Miller, the founder of the free nonfiction Holocaust theater project, ThinEdgeOfTheWedge.com. I grew up in Elgin, Illinois, a town north of Chicago, which was not a Holocaust community. Our grandparents and parents had come to the United States to escape the Tsar at the turn of the 20th century and other pogroms. And yet in 1970, only 25 years after the end of the World War II and the Holocaust, my U.S. Army officer husband and I were stationed in Munich, Germany, and this changed our lives forever.
Asaf Romirowsky is the Executive Director of Scholars for Peace in the Middle East and the Association for the Study of the Middle East and Africa. Trained as a Middle East historian, he has published widely on the Arab-Israeli conflict, on Israel and Zionist history, Israeli and Zionist history, and against the boycott, divest, and sanction Israel movement. He published in his publicly engaged scholarship has been featured in the Wall Street Journal, the Times of Israel, Jerusalem Post, Ynet, and Tablet, among other online and print media outlets. Asaf, it's wonderful to have you on our show. We're honored. Welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So today I get to ask the first question, and what it is I would like if you could tell us a little bit about your history and how it motivates you in your work.
Sure. Well, again, thank you both for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's great to talk to your audience at large today. I am as you mentioned, I come out of Middle East studies. I'm a trained academic. I've been in this space for the greater part of the past 2 decades, dealing with combating anti-Semitism and these days dealing with the boycott movement. I have lived and shuttled my entire life between the United States and Israel. I also have family who were Holocaust survivors. I grew up with the understanding of the significance and importance of Zionism as a core component of Jewish identity. And these days, what we're seeing and what I've been observing over the past many years now, that there's now been a growth, a wedge created between Zionism and one's Jewish identity. And that's a lot of the problems that we're facing today. Because I have spent the better part of my career dealing with bridging U.S.-Israel relations and also working in the think tank and the academy, what I've been finding is, I would point to 2 critical issues that we're seeing today that are hurting us all around, and that has to do with the apathy and lack of education. And what we've seen is a significant growth of propaganda that has been replacing slowly but surely scholarship. And this has been a trend that we're seeing in the academy since the 1960s, if not before that, in North America in particular. So a lot of that motivates me, not to mention the fact that my twin boys and my concern about where they're going to go and where they're going to be educated are definitely significant aspects that play into how I feel about the next generation. I think that we are lacking significantly when it comes to historical anchors. We were raised on the idea, those of us who talk about the Arab-Israeli conflict, looking at the benchmarks that built the conflict from 48, 67, 82, 73, and so on and so forth. Today, you have an entire generation doesn't remember kids on campuses 9/11. So, I mean, you talk about the ongoing movements of historical anchors that give more of a reality check about the world we live in today. Part of that is making history alive and digestible for the younger generation in particular. both of you, I'm sure, this is something that has come, you think about and talk about for sure, is the fact that this, of course, is the last generation where we will have Holocaust survivors. So, of course, that again is a significant deficit as far as how we teach and learn about anti-Semitism today. None of the environment that we're seeing today is anything different than the old hatred that we've seen since the Middle Ages. But it's the repackaging, it's the volume, it's the social media, and trying to unpack all of those elements are critical.
Last year, you published an article about the Middle East Studies Association in the United States, which passed a resolution to boycott Israel out of solidarity with the Palestinian cause. What is the position on Israel of most Middle East study departments in the United States?
That's a good question. That's a devoted lecture we can give a few hours to. In my day job, I also head the Association of Middle East Studies in Africa. ASMIA was created about 15 years ago and was founded, the founding fathers of the association were the late Professor Bernard Lewis and Professor Fouad Ajami, both who were mentors and individuals that I looked up to in my career. MESA, which is the counter organization, the Middle East Studies Association of America, has been today, and I would say there's been a slow but steady trajectory, has been hijacked by Arab scholars, Palestinian sympathizers, where today, the culminating with, of course, their vote on BDS. BDS, just to give you, just to be clear about that for your listeners, which is the boycott, divestment, and sanction movement, is a halo for basically trying to discuss the Arab-Israeli conflict. It is fallacious, it is full of propaganda, but it is tightly digestible for those who are looking for a way to put all the ailments of the entire region on singling out Israel. And so what is, I think, is ironic for academics and an anathema to the academy at large, that instead of engaging with the region or learning about the region or whatnot, learning the language, learning the culture, learning the history, they are willing to boycott it as a way to scratch it off and to try to divest from anything related to the conversation in order to put pressure on the state of Israel. The totality and the goal, the end goal of the BDS movement is not a two-state solution. It is basically the eradication of any kind of Jewish presence. So all the hatred that we saw in Germany and prior to that has been now targeted and fixated strategically and surgically on the state of Israel as the I would say, as the original sin, as the embodiment of all evil. When it comes to Jews. What has happened is that MESA refuses to now really, it's now a political arm. It's an advocacy organization. They're not willing to engage in scholarship. They're not willing to talk about anything related to Israeli scholars. They're trying to prevent, they're going to boycotting individuals in Israeli universities, exchanging of research and whatnot. So again, that is a total detriment, and I would argue really has to do with the degradation of the academy at large. Yeah, scholarship is about engagement.
So the American Association for Middle East Studies doesn't want to do academic business with anything Israeli. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
So long, again, with the argument that they're making is because of the politicization of the association as it relates to the Palestinian narrative, and so this is where they play this out. But this, I know that Phyllis has a question, but I just want to understand this is not a new process. The Bernard Lewis is a critical and one of the most prolific scholars that was in the 20th century. Probably will not see another Bernard Lewis. There was a famous debate between Bernard Lewis and Edward Said. The Middle East Studies Association has been maybe you could say in the 80s was maybe fragmented between those who were Lewisites and Saidians, but I would say that even more so, it was been always hijacked by Saidians. Said was not a Middle East scholar. He was a professor of English Lit. but his ability and his to articulate a message and becoming one of the well-known advocates of the Palestinian cause, that debate solidified a lot of where the association, where Mesa was going. And Lewis already identified this problem back in the 70s about the lack of balance in the academy, the lack of balance in the association. And this was even before that debate. And so you already saw the signs early on about the politicization and the pro-Arab narrative versus the anti-Israel sentiment that played into the conversation. And it wasn't even anti-Israel, it is anti-Israel, but I'm saying there was also other elements of refusing to engage in the larger regional dynamics at large.
I just wanted to clarify something. Every time you say academy, I'm sitting here a block from the Academy of Motion Pictures, Arts and Sciences here in LA, that I want our listeners to understand that you're talking about academia, right?
Yes.
Okay. But you're using the word academy, which is fine. I just want to clarify it.
Yes, we're not the Academy of Music and not the Academy Awards. When I'm talking about academia at large, I'm talking about the Academy, the interchangeably those terminology. So yes.
Universities.
The university.
So what is the effect, Asaf, of the position of this Middle East Studies Association, this anti-Israel position? What is the effect on other faculty, on students, on American policy, and on public opinion?
Sure. I think that what it speaks volumes of the fact that the academy, which was supposed to be a source of information for policymakers and to understand the region and historical, that the information that they've been providing has been at best inaccurate, I would even say fallacious, and there's been a growth of other feeders, think tankers, and others who have replaced the role of the academy. I remember attending myself Mesa's annual meeting after 9/11, and the fact that the president of the Mesa at the time stood up there and mocked the study of terrorism, calling it terrorology. All of us who engaged in terrorism are warmongers. And so there was so anything related to the threat of Islamism, radical Islam, the concern about the growth of terrorism was basically put aside, poo-pooed, for lack of an academic term, and as it was being that we were amplifying things that did not exist. Even right after 9/11, when you saw what was happening, there has been a refusal to accept the reality on the ground. In effect, historically speaking, I would say since the 1960s, there has been a growth of a Palestinianization of the academy, similar to what we saw with Soviet ideology that was infiltrating the academy here since the 1950s. And so what you had is, and this came directly out of a PLO playbook, there was an understanding within the circles of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, Arafat and company, that if we can't defeat Israel militarily speaking, we can do it through the use of what we call in the academy and social sciences, the use of soft power, using academia, journalism, agents of influence to try to shape identities and opinions. And particular after the Six-Day War in 1967, you've seen a growth of Palestinian academics or sympathizers who have come to the United States and have hijacked the narrative within these departments and centers. Furthermore, there has been a massive amount of funds of support that came in through Saudi Arabia and other countries, with the idea that if people buy centers or buy departments and chairs, you buy the politics in which these topics are being taught, something that we still see to this day. And many of us, including myself, have exposed ties to terrorism, anti-Semitic rhetoric. These are all the symptoms of the politicization of the academy. Middle East studies, in many ways, is the nucleus of the most low-hanging fruit when it comes, to the bias in the academy. But I would say that these trends are where BDS lives and breathes, is in the humanities at large. And it's a very succinct and a very strategic way of looking at the situation in a very binary way, to say that, in basically positioning the conflict as a black and white situation. Jews are evil, Israelis are evil, and and those who don't subscribe to that, we are the good. So if you want to like look at the good and bad, people usually want to stay on the side of good. And so today Israel is seen as exporting racism. The projection of the debate about race in America is projected to the conflict. Jews, Israelis are white, Palestinians are black. That's the kind of binary viewpoint that is projected at large. And as it relates to the conversation in America today regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion in the academy, Jews and Israel in the conflict do not fall into that conversation. Zionism is equated and is seen as synonymous to racism. So if you are fighting racism, and then you have to be anti-Israel. And so this is part of the condition that you see today in the university. And BDS makes it very, very simple and digestible to decide for students and for faculty on what side they stand on as it relates to these matters. And that's part of the equation and part of the puzzle that has been shaped here as a result of all.
And so if you're not anti-Israel, you're a racist, basically, according to the current fashionable narrative. Is there also an effect of the anti-Israel position of the most Middle East study centers on American policy and public opinion?
Sure. I mean, I think that there is what you're seeing in general, the animosity, the hatred towards Israel is not only anti-Israel, it's anti-Western, it's anti-American. And so because of the value system, similar that Israelis have inside of Israel when it comes to democratization and democracy and values and shared values, a lot of this sentiment plays out, back and forth within that understanding. The minimizing threats when it comes, for example, to the threat of radical Islamism, and the threat of terrorism, looking at the mosaic of the Middle East when it comes to minorities in the region. Case in point, the Abraham Accords that were signed made little to no difference on the discourse in the universities. A phenomenal event as far as the normalizing between Israel and other countries in the region, where the number one goal, by the way, of the boycott movement is anti-normalization, to depict it and to minimize. So it did not move the needle one iota. And so when you have other Arab countries, other Muslim individuals who are engaging with Israel, BDS, of course, is, they ignore all of that. This goes against the narrative, which is, again, to my point before, the end goal has nothing to do with reconciliation or normalization. It has to do with the eradication, basically a replacement theology, basically that we are going to move all the Jews outside of Israel. I mean, this is the kind of the anti-Semitic rhetoric that plays into the conversation. They call for the most maximalist demands that were never even part of the peace negotiations. A full right of return that basically is the demographic takeover and the eradication of the Jewish state. None of these things, are remotely whatever even meet the negotiations or the conversation between Israelis and Palestinians. But in the academy and within the discourse within American academia, it lives and breathes. Israel, they have courses. Israel is an apartheid state. The use of the inversion of, or what I would consider to be Holocaust inversion into the conversation, as far as how Israelis and Palestinians are depicted. There is nothing scholarly and there's nothing factual about any of the information that is being taught here, and that's been part of my concern and my colleagues, is the replacement of scholarship with propaganda. and that is a detriment to our students at large.
Why do you think people are so happy to jump on this bandwagon? I mean, besides, the proving that they're anti-racist. I mean, and it goes back to anti-Semitic tropes, but still today, with all the world problems, why do you think people are so happy to jump on this BDS and anti-Zionist bandwagon?
What you're seeing today, and this is something that I've observed and looked at, there has been a kind of this is a religion. There are priests and there's congregations as far as how this cultural problem that we're seeing today. I mean, and let me be clear, this is not limited to the university and to the halls of the academy or the academic circles. There is a cultural problem, that you're seeing today, and whatever happens in the universities never stops there. You saw it with groups like Black Lives Matter, the Women's March, who've been able to adopt on or use the Palestinian narrative as the quintessential depiction of oppression. And so if you are against oppression, if you are against minorities, and you want to stand up for the side of truth, or a lot of the phraseology, as I said, truth and justice, social justice, fighting injustices, these are the kind of trigger words that have been used within the framework of what is considered to be another phrase that is commonly used is intersectionality. The idea that you are able to project one's own situation on another situation, and as a result of the so-called kinship or relationship or a superficial kinship, we can adopt those kind of similarities, and that's what brings about the intersectional connection. And so the gold standard of oppression, if you ask most individuals, is the Palestinian narrative. They've done a phenomenal job as far as showcasing their situation. They have refugees for life, the symbolism of statelessness. These are all the imageries that they use, and not to mention the forceful images as far as the famous old picture of a Palestinian child throwing a rock at an Israeli tank, the image of the David and Goliath inverted. I mean, these are all the images that have sunk into the psyche. And so if you amplify that with the use of social media, what you're seeing today, the fact that every Israeli official and every Israeli leader, left, right, or center, has been depicted in SS uniform, the fact that refugee camps are concentration camps, and the fact that Jews are worse than Nazis. Jews are Nazis. And so you have this entire process that is played out here. So when you have this, feed into the environment of today that has been rooted in the religiosity of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the fact that that our kids are taught to believe that everybody's equal, doesn't fit into the box of the situation in Israel for sure, doesn't fit into the Middle East reality, but it's easy to accept these terms, which is why BDS is so attractive. We're calling for justice. We're calling for divestiture. We did the same, and historically speaking, when apartheid ended, and you needed something new to look towards another cause after what happened in Durban, the second Durban conference, where you had massive banners of Zionism as racism, and this was part of the amplification of the modern day boycott back in 2005. The Durban factor also played into all of this. So they needed a new cause. The new cause, of course, is Israel. I mean, to project our hatred and to where our justice comes from. And that all feeds in to the Western culture that we're playing out today. Not to mention, of course, the fact that another element that plays into this is, of course, the colonial settler narrative as far as Jews as colonialists, and you've pushed us out, and so we have to fight that oppression. You see a lot of that similarities as it relates to Native Americans. And so again, these connections, or fallacious connections as I would call them, play into the imagery that allows us to feed and create an entire depiction of a reality which is which has really shows no truthfulness in the halls and in the universities.
In your article of last year about the hijacking of Middle East studies, you cite a report that identifies billions of foreign money being donated to Middle East study centers in the United States. Who are these foreign donors? Which universities receive their money? What do these donors want? And what is the impact of these donations?
So the billions of dollars have been coming in for years. Saudi, the Qataris, any prince out there who wants to buy, a chair or give back a donation or a gift to educating their sons. Georgetown, Harvard. I mean, there's a plethora here in Philadelphia. There was money that was associated with a terrorist organization, IT, at Temple University. This is not a new thing. In fact, ironically, there was an infrastructure that was laid out. One of the first places was University of Arkansas, the King Fahad Center. There's been a slow but sure infrastructure building that was as I said before, with the idea of that universities are the most profitable nonprofit there is. Let me just be blunt about that. They rarely say no to money that is given to them. And so unless they were called on it, as far as checking the monies. And so they are more than happy to accept donations, which is a drop in the bucket for any of these oil princes, as far as 20 million here, 20 million there, with the idea of buying the scholarship, with the idea of buying a narrative. So when you're sitting on a chair that is called X, Y, and Z, memorializing a certain viewpoint, the understanding is that you will teach based on that viewpoint, which again goes counter to the academy. At Columbia University, there was a big to-do a few years ago when they raised money for the Edward Said Chair. The current, the individual who holds that chair is, one of his acolytes, Rashid Khalidi. These are not new. There is an echo chamber that, has allowed these systems to flourish. And in lieu of discussion about scholarship, research, all the elements that we talk about that should be critical to educating the next generation. The goal of the university was not to spoon feed you, but to allow you to do inquisitive research, to look and to understand and to create the tools that students need. Otherwise, what makes us different than a madrasa in Tehran or anywhere else? This goes against the basic tenets of a university, of a Western liberal system. And I think that when Alan Bloom wrote his famous book about the closing of the American mind, you should do a follow-up these days as far as willing to look at facts and to actually dissect information and come to conclusions. But again, that's not part of what we're seeing today. Furthermore, since the 1960s, we've seen a growth of academics who are really scholar activists rather than actual scholars. So their activism in itself, they see it as a token of their scholarship. More concerning these days, it used to be, I would say, maybe 10 or 15 years ago that we could characterize or fragment between the humanities and the STEM areas. But even in the STEM today, we're seeing a lot of this propaganda feed in, which again, clearly 1 + 1 does not necessarily always equals 2. And there are endless amount of theories that amount to nothing in the humanities that are able to validate these fallacious narratives.
So as we come close to the end of this program, what can be done about this? We don't have billions and billions of dollars to give to Harvard to have a chair that's the opposite of the chair being funded. So what can be done?
Look, as I said earlier, I think that part of what you're doing here now, what we're doing this afternoon is critical, the education. I think that the awareness of what's happening, at large, people need to speak out. In general, in this country, Jews and Catholics are the two largest populations that have given money to the academy, and the two populations today that the academy has, the academic halls have turned on them. Most people in the United States, their first line of giving is their alma maters. They believe that, that their kids and grandkids, that they're going to go to the same institution and benefit from the same advantages that they benefited from. With the lack of understanding of that, where they may be wanting to send their kids and grandkids to is not the same institution that they went to. And I think that we need to speak out as stakeholders, alumni, stakeholders, exposing what's going on. We have an obligation. The university, if the university cannot maintain the safety of their constituency, students, of late now, you've had an entire saga going on in CUNY in New York, which has been entirely hijacked. I actually spoke there a few weeks ago before New Year's, where there were signs of eradicating Zionism out of CUNY. The entire faculty of the law school has voted on BDS. I mean, really, a ground zero for a lot of these kind of activism. These are taxpayer dollars that we should be talking about where that money is going. We should be making a point, even with private schools, about where donations are coming from. And if universities are hurt in their pocketbooks, then it's going to make a dent. But I also think that as it relates to BDS, there's not a university today that does not have some element of this. And I don't think that we should be going in with blindfolds on. We need to know what the reality is, what we're facing, and do a better job in education, demanding, and this is something that, myself, many of my colleagues have been demanding. This is not about not teaching Arab nationalism or the Palestinian narrative or whatnot. It's the fact that there's a lack of balance. It's the fact that you're only teaching a one-sided perspective without giving an opportunity for another side. Our job is to provide facts and to give them the research, not to feed them the answers. And so that's where this is where the concern is part, the quality of education that we need to be making sure that our students are receiving. And this is not only limited to universities, by the way. We're seeing the same kind of symptoms. Both of you are in California. We're seeing it in the middle schools and high schools. There is it starts earlier. And so the younger we start, the better off we are to teach and to know and to hold the university, which I still believe in, and I think it's an important as far as a social indicator to the standards that, it was founded on, and to make sure that we are providing the kind of quality education that maintains those values that we believe in.
In other words, you're saying we should all speak up against ideologies in educational institutions instead of education in educational institutions. Is that correct?
Yes.
And to put it for lay people, parents should pay attention to what their kids are being taught in middle and high school and see whether there's a balanced perspective. To start at the grassroots level, to make sure that kids are not indoctrinated in this belief starting in middle school.
Yes.
So it's incumbent on every parent and grandparent to pay attention to what their children and grandchildren are being taught.
Right. And to add to your point, history cannot be taught as a factor of current events. They need to know the history. They need to have an understanding of what's going on. They need to appreciate and connect the dots and repeat the understanding of the history so they know what they're facing. And that goes for every topic. But I think that, but again, breaking the one-sidedness of this and feeding into, relying on one-liners on social media or anywhere else, this is a problem. I mean, part of the problem is that this younger generation relies on memes, on TikToks. And how do you take a swatch of history and try to condense it into a medium that they can understand and digest? And that's a challenge that we have today. But again, it's not something that we should give up. I think that it's incumbent upon us, all of us who care about the well-being of Western society, American society, that we make sure we're doing a better job on the education.
I think that's Really good closing words, although I will give you a chance to say anything else you'd like to add, but I think what you just said is so important.
No, I mean, there's a lot to discuss more, but I think those are the critical issues that we need to understand. And I think, again, the best thing we can do in forums like this is breaking the apathy and the lack of education. And we need to people to understand of what's happening out there. Let's not wait until there is tragedy. I mean, we're seeing anti-Semitism, swastikas, and violence all over the place. There's no need to reach to that point where we can work on dealing with the elements on the granular parts that are all part of these components.
Could we please try to recap what our listeners as individuals could do to help turn the tide, the anti-Israel, the anti-Zionism tide in education?
Sure. Yeah, I think speaking out, educating, taking reaching out to their alma maters, asking the right questions, supporting organizations who are combating, the BDS movement, anti-Semitism. Again, all of us need support. We're all, trying to raise, the awareness of the challenges that we're facing today. Again, these problems range from cultural, historical to legal problems, of how to fighting and combating and maintaining, holding the university accountable when it comes to what anti-Semitism is. I mean, these are all things that everybody needs to know what to do, what's in our toolbox, and how to combat these fallacious narratives. And so that's critical. We should not go in with our blinders on all of this, and we should be very well aware of what are the challenges and how to combat them.
Thank you so much, really, for your insightful words. I hope our listeners take your call to action to heart. We thank our listeners for listening. Those of you who have not yet seen Evelyn's documentary, Never Again Is Now, I urge you to watch it either on Amazon or YouTube. It's very relevant for what we talked about today. And you can learn more about my nonfiction Holocaust theater project at thinedgeofthewedge.com. And as we end every episode, we say, please, without putting yourself in physical harm, speak up against anti-Semitism and all hate.